Hello everyone and welcome to another Middlegame episode focusing on the rooks with Coach B and MasterChess.com. In this video we're going to focus on the time in preparation for opening a file. There are many situations that occur in a game when a pawn capture can open up a file. In that case, the side that can initiate the pawn capture to open up a file also has more space in that area. What he wants to do is double up the rooks behind the pawn and only make use of the pawn trade when the resulting open file will clearly be his. This first position we're going to look at was achieved after 23 moves in a game played by Jeremy Silland versus Robert Maguire in 1988. If we look at this position, we could see that white has a lot more space, and also he has stopped any counterplay that black might have dreamed of on the queen side. The pawn on a4 together with the knight, bishop, and queen, clearly controlled the squares b5 and c4, and black has no play on the queen side. Therefore, white is able to turn his attention to the other side, the king side. So here he plays the move h4. Black responded with h6. Coming back, capturing on h4 is a big mistake. After this, white can simply push on g5. And now after f takes g5, bishop takes g5, h6, bishop takes h4, rook to f7, rook g1, white is slowly going to use this open file and put tremendous pressure on the king. After something like rook a to f8, rook to g6, knight to e8, rook b to g1, after something like king h8, black is pretty much lost. Here white can play queen to h5, and no matter what black is going to play here, he's not going to be able to last very long. He doesn't even have many options as all his pieces are pretty much trapped. If he plays something like bishop to f6, well, after rook takes on h6 check, rook to h7, rook takes h7 is checkmate. Making a waiting move with queen to b7 also fails to rook takes h6 check, bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, rook to h7, and here queen takes f8 is checkmate. Given the best reply here, bishop takes f5, it's all bliss. After e takes f5, knight f6, bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, rook takes g7, maybe queen to d8, queen g4, rook f6 to f7, f6. No matter what black plays here, he's going to be checkmated. If queen to e8 is played, after queen to h5, rook takes g7, queen takes h6 check, rook to h7, queen takes h7 is checkmate. And if queen plays to c7, after rook to g8 check, rook takes g8, queen takes g8 is checkmate again. So coming back, h6 was played. Here white responded with king to g2, preparing to bring the rooks to the h file, king to f7, king f3, rook to h8, rook to h1, rook a to g8, rook to h2. If we look at this position, we could notice that white has three squares on the h file, the square h1, h2, and h3, which means that white can potentially triple up on that h file, while black only has two squares, h7 and h8, which means he's only going to be able to have two pieces on that file, while white can have three, meaning he's going to dominate that file. Coming back, if here white makes the mistakes of h takes g5, then black can take on g5 as well, and now black has just as many squares on the h file as white, and white will lose his opportunity for dominating that file. Therefore, rook to h2 is the correct move. After this, black played king to e7, rook b to h1, king to d8, and now bishop to b5. An excellent move. With black bringing his troops to the h file, white now prepares to penetrate on the opposite wing. After this, the game continued with bishop takes b5, knight takes b5, knight takes b5, queen takes b5, and then king to e7. Coming back, king to c8 is not any better because here white will be able to open up a file and use his rooks to penetrate into the opponent's camp. And I'm just going to fast forward to the best continuation and see how white will win in this game. And here black is checkmated. So coming back after king to e7, rook to c1 was played, king to f7, and now another excellent move, pawn to d6. Here white is pushing to create a totally different open file. Now black is pretty much done, because he either must take the pawn or allow rook to d2. In either case, he's going to lose this game. If he takes the pawn on d6, after rook to d2, queen to b8, rook to d7 check, king to f8, bishop takes c5 check, king e8, rook takes g7, king to d8, queen to d7 here is checkmate. And coming back, queen to d8 was played, but even this loses after queen to c4 check, king to f8, queen to e6, h5, bishop takes c5, h takes g4 check, and no better is taking the bishop on c5, because after rook takes c5, h takes g4 check, king g3, bishop h6, rook c8, king g7, rook takes d8, and rook takes d8, white is clearly winning. So coming back in the game, black here played h takes g4 check. After king to g2, bishop to h6, bishop takes b6, g takes h4, bishop takes d8, h3 check, king to f1, rook to g7, and bishop to e7 check. Black resigned. This next example comes from a game played by Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky in 1992. This position was reached after 21 moves. And if we draw our attention to the A file, we could see that we're dealing with a very similar position. On the A file, white has 3 squares available for his pieces, the squares A1, A2, and A3, while black only has 2 squares, the squares A7 and A8. Here, it would be a terrible mistake to take on B5, because after black takes on B5 as well, now they both have the same number of squares available. However, coming back, here Fischer played the correct move, rook to A3. Black replied with knight D to F6, rook E to A1, queen to D7, and rook 1 to A2. Here, white could open up the file by taking on B5, as he is doubled up on that file. However, here Fischer is going for an even better position. After rook F to C8, white played queen to C1. And you could see white's idea. After bishop to F8, white moves the queen to A1, setting up the legendary Alekhine's gun, where white is tripling up on a file with the queen behind the 2 rooks. And the game continued with queen to E8, and now Fischer plays knight to F1. And here Fischer did some deep thinking. He wants to use the knight to go to D2 to B1 to A3 to put pressure on B5, because he knows that after he's going to open up the file with A takes on B5, black will respond back with A takes on B5 as well. And even though he has control of the file, that B5 pawn will be a weakness, and he's going to use the knight to take care of it. I also want to mention that white here does not need to worry about black taking on A4, because after bishop takes A4, white is totally dominating this position as well. He still has control of the A file, and now he also controls the light squares on the A4 through E8 diagonal. So the game here continued with bishop to E7, knight 1 to D2, king to G7, knight to B1. And here, black decides to sacrifice a piece for counterplay, and he plays knight takes on E4, and then bishop takes E4. Coming back, knight to G8, a waiting move, will be just too passive. After A takes B5, A takes B5, rook takes on E8, rook takes back, rook takes on A8, queen takes A8, queen takes A8, bishop takes A8, and knight to A3, white will be able to win the pawn on B5 and also the pawn on C4, and then with 2 connected passed pawns, he's going to definitely win this game. So knight to E4 was played here, and then bishop takes E4. Now I'm just going to fast forward through the game so you can see how this game ended. And here black resigned. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video, and stay tuned for more lessons. If you liked my video, please subscribe and don't forget to check out my new website. masteryourchess.com, where you can learn, practice, test, and master your chess knowledge.